Shalom, this is Avraham, Shira, and Israel. Welcome to our little class on Tu B'Shvat. It's a wonderful time to be in the land and to have a clear day without rain and wind, and to appreciate the beauty of Eretz Israel. And I was opening to some comments and teachings from Rabbi Eliyahu Kitov, and he gives us in his book a whole series of teachings about the fruit in the land of Israel. And these teachings are from the Talmud, and he brings them together. So we need to share them. And I think we're going to see something very interesting, very miraculous, really, about the land of Israel and what happens to the land when the Jewish people come back. And if we look at this on a deeper level, we can understand why there's so much opposition from the other side, from the negative forces, to the Jews being in Eretz Israel. Because the other side knows what we don't know. The people that are innocent and pure with God and with life, they're not really thinking about what the other side knows. But the other side knows very well that when the Jews come back to the land, prophecy returns. When the Jews come back to the land, Jewish kingship returns. And they know when we come back to the land, that the land itself begins to produce in a way that represents exponential growth. There's no other way to describe it. And these are all prophetic statements from the Talmud. So the first is the fruit of the land of Israel bear the tidings of redemption. That when there is new fruit in the land of Israel, there is news of redemption in the land. And Rabbi Abba said, there is no greater manifestation of the final redemption than this. As it is said, and you, the mountains of Israel, shall give forth your branches, and you shall bear your fruit for my people Israel, because they have come home. That's a nice thought. You come home and the trees respond to you. The land responds to you. If you read Mark Twain's report of visiting Eretz Israel 160 years ago, he describes a desolation. There's no desolation left now except a little desert here and there. And when the land of Israel will give forth its fruit bountifully, then the redemption will draw near, and there is no greater manifestation than this. Rashi adds, in other words, you don't have to look for the miracles of, like the ones that we saw in Egypt or the other fantastic, extraterrestrial type of miracles. All we need to do is see that the land is producing in a way that is greater than you see anywhere else. And so you see that God just turns up the volume on the blessing. But he turns it up in a way, we're going to see more about this in a second. In her first days, the land of Israel, which you cross will not to possess, it has its hills and valleys. And this is in Parshat Dvarim, the end of Moshe Rabbeinu's giving of the Torah, and the recap, he says, does this not speak badly of the land? Because it mentions hills as places that are hard to farm, and hills of rocks, and not much soil, and very hard to work. And that would be the counterintuitive, that we think that the prophet comes to praise the land, not to put the land down. He's trying to get the people excited about moving in, right? What does that reference to the valleys teach us? That just as the valleys add to the excellence of the land, for the surface of a valley is good for sowing, because we know when the rain comes downhill, it gathers minerals from the mountains and carries them into the valleys. So the valleys become rich. Now, I live out here in the mountains, and you see that all the valleys are where the trees are planted, the olives and the grapes and the figs, and they do wonderful. If you plant on the top of the mountain, it's a different story. So just the geography of a hilly land concentrates the minerals in more dense locations. And likewise do the hills add to the praise of the land, as we were just saying. And further, both the hills and the valleys yield fruit with specific qualities. Listen closely, that each location in Eretz Israel has different qualities of fruit. He goes on to tell us, while fruit grown on the hills are light, the fruit of the valleys are heavy. Now that's interesting. The fruit of the valley, down where all the rainwater gathers, that's heavy fruit. It picks up a lot of water when it grows. But the fruit that's grown on the hills where the water runs off is light fruit. Mike, I'm sure, just hang on. You'll find something to add to the to the talk. Welcome, Sebastio. Now, so think about this. If you're on a donkey and you got to go pick up some fruit, do you want to climb this big mountain to pick up heavy fruit? No. Down in the valley, it's much easier to pick up the heavy fruit. But when it talks about light fruit, then it's not as much work to go on the mountain to pick up your fruit. Now, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai comes along and is more specific, and every vintner in the world knows what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said 2,000 years ago. 12 types of lands were given to the Israel corresponding to the 12 tribes. 12 types of land. In other words, not 2, not 4. Shalom, Daniel, welcome. And these 12 types of land, of course, correspond to the 12 tribes, which each carried their own blessing from Jacob. And the fruit of one tribe's land tasted different from the fruit of another's. So you see, the grapes over here are going to be different than the grapes up north, and the olives down here are going to be different than the olives up north. And wherever you go, this is true. And of course, it's true in France, in the grape growing regions there, and I'm sure in California, everywhere else where they raise grapes. But here, every single fruit and every single produce is absorbing something different from the land. Now, if you're a biologist and an agriculturally based, rooted person, and you could tell us, well, these minerals are here, and they're going to add to the taste of this type of fruit. But I think it's still deeper, because there's a metaphysical element to the land. The 12 tribes represent 12 constellations, which have 12 different angels and 12 different stars that are represented by those. And so automatically we have a chain reaction of spiritual energy entering the land that enters the people that live in different places in the land. And if you travel around, you'll start to see the differences in the Jews too. You go down to the desert, you go to the lake, you go to the ocean, you go to the mountains, you go to Jerusalem. Every town, every place that you go in this land, you see the people are a little different. And I'm sure you could say that about America and every other country. Why not? But the idea is the connection to the land, we give to it and it gives to us. We become part of where we live. Okay? And so, but each one tastes differently. And he brings an example from Moses, when he blessed the tribes. He said he dips his foot in oil, that Asher puts his foot in oil. And Asher, of course, inherited land in the north where there's a lot of olive trees. And it's corresponding to, and he tells us, and we learn from this that the land of Asher was greatly rich in oil, obvious. It once happened that the people, now we have a story. Now we're going to get a bunch of stories that are going to show us this fantastic relationship between the produce of the land and the presence of the Jews on the land, and why it's so, well, redemptive or messianic, if you want to get fancy. Choose your language as you will. So it once happened that the people of Ludkia, now these were not poor people, were in need of olive oil. They appointed an official and said to him, go and acquire for us olive oil. And they wanted 100 times 10,000, which is a million. It's another biblical way of saying a million. They didn't speak in like millions, billions, trillions, quadrillions like the Fed does. But, they spoke in thousands of thousands, and that's a million. No, it doesn't tell us the exact measures. But there are biblical measures for oil. A log is basically 6 eggs. So one log is 6 eggs of oil. So you figure that's probably about, I think there's a different size eggs, but really that's probably about 30 grams of oil. Okay. And he went to Jerusalem and said, I'm in need of oil for 100 times 10,000. And they answered him, well, go to Tzur. Now Tzur, if it's the same Tzur that I know on the map, is way up north. So that's a big trip from Jerusalem. Why they sent him so far away, I'm not sure. He went to Tzur and they said, I'm in need of oil for 100 times 10,000. People come in with you get excited if you raise olives and someone wants to buy 1 million liters of your oil. You're going to be busy for a couple of years, right? That's good business. But they said, no, go to Gush Chalav. Now, Gush Chalav is right near Meron in the north of the country. It's the upper Galil. And he went there, and the Gush Chalad said, and he told them what he needed, and they said, go to so-and-so. And so now they sent him to a person, not a region. And Gush Chalab, there's many beautiful olive trees, as anybody that's driven through there knows. ancient and big, thick, trunks, etc. He went to the person's house, and they did not find him. And they said to him, "He is in the field." He went out and found him tending the olive trees in the field. And he said to him, "I am in need of a million liters of oil, let's say. Wait for me, and I will finish tending the olive tree." So like most wise people, they're not in a hurry about things because, we think better when we don't hurry. Let's face it. And that's probably why Paro wants us to hurry. And today Paro is in the form of the social needs of let's just call it the pace of society has changed. But the wise man says, "Wait, I'm going to finish working on my tree, then we'll do business." Easy does it. He's been a long time on the road. So when he finished his work, he took his tools and he went back to his house. And the official thought, is it possible that this one man has 100 times 10,000 worth of the measures of oil? It seems that the Jews have been laughing at me, making fun of me, sending me around the country to find so much oil. And remember, he's just a representative of the people of Lutkia. So he's trying to answer to them. And when the man from the Gush Chalav reached his house, this olive grower, his maidservant brought forth pitchers of warm water, and he washed his hands and feet, and she brought forth a gold container filled with olive oil, and which he dipped his hands and feet to fulfill what was said, and he dips his foot in oil. So you see, the ancients, they had this custom. They lived by the verses. The verse says you dip your feet in oil, so you dip your feet in oil. And it's a very quaint custom. I think if people came over, and if I went over to somebody's house and said, "Can I dip my feet in your oil?" I'm not sure I'd get invited back. I'm not sure. They might have an excuse. Okay, when bread was put before him, and they ate and drank, and after eating and drinking, in other words, taking our time here, he rose and measured for the official the oil he'd asked for, 100 times 10,000 measures of oil. 1,000,000 measures. Okay. This is a lot of oil to carry around town and to go back to Lutkia. "And do you want any more?" he said to him. "I have no more money." "It's okay. You want more? I'll give you more, and I'll come with you, and I'll receive my money when we get to your destination." So then he rose and he measured for him another 18 times 10,000. Right? That's 180,000 more measures of oil. Now, he didn't have 18-wheeler trucks. They said the man did not leave a mule or camel in the land of Israel, which did not bring for him oil. In other words, he rented every horse and mule that he could find, or camel, to bring his purchase home. And the people of Lutkia, of course, they greatly praised him. They said to him, "Address your," and in other words, they praised the man who grew the trees and produced the oil. They didn't praise their own fellow who went to all the work to bring this oil. And he said to them, "No, address your praise towards this person." In other words, that's another thing that wise people do. They deflect praise. And it's pleasant, actually. When you receive praise, it's not, it's kind of cheesy. What can I tell you? Right? But when you deflect praise, you pass the buck, you pass the ball around the team, and it's much more pleasant, and you'll see that people that do that when they get praised, it's much more, it's a signifier of humility. Okay. And he says to him, "Well, he deserves all the credit. Furthermore, I am indebted to him for the sum of 18 times 10,000. Right? So, and as it is said, some appear wealthy, and now this is the nimshal, the internal teaching that the Talmud wants to teach us. Some people appear wealthy and they have nothing. And some people are poor and they are exceedingly wealthy." Now, I think growing up in the States, where money was just about everything, there's a lot of confusing messages that we take about money. But you see, wealth is not just money. Wealth is how you live your life, how you live with others, how you share what you have, and how you value the blessings that you have. Okay. But we're gonna veer back to our main idea here, is this exponential blessing of Eretz Yisrael, especially on Tu B'Shvat, which is today, and which is a day where the sun is really starting to get closer to the earth again. And or maybe it's the other way around. The earth, the sun, the earth is getting closer to the sun, and we're beginning, the hope of spring is in the air, shall we say. So another story, the land flowing with milk and honey. Now listen to this. Rami, the son of Yechezkel, visited Bnei Brak, and he saw goats grazing under a fig tree. Honey dripped from the fig tree, and milk dripped from the goats, and both intermixed, the goat's milk and the honey from coming out of the figs mixed together. What a combination. And the Hacham said, behold, a land flowing with milk and honey. That's another beautiful custom of the rabbis, is that they know which verses apply to any situation in your everyday life. And so it connects you to Hashem in a much more spontaneous way. It's a beautiful thing. And that's the way the rabbis talk in every yeshiva. Now, Rabbi said to Rav Preda, are you not going to show me the clusters in your vineyard? Okay, so, but there we saw an interesting thing too. There was so much milk in the goats, it came out without being milked. And there was so much fig honey, which today they call it silon, which is basically the syrup that comes out of dates, excuse me. No, this was figs. I'll get it straight. Silon is dates. I get my dates and my figs mixed up. Okay. So, but again, we're seeing here that there's something supernatural about the natural in Eretz Yisrael. And I think that's a good way to put it. Rabbi said to Rabbi Preda, are you not going to show me the clusters in your vineyard, the grapes? Yes, Rabbi Preda went out to show them to him, and he looked far ahead, and he saw in the distance what looked like an ox walking amongst the grapes. And he said to Rabbi Preda, does not that the ox ruin your vines? He said, my friend, he said, this ox which you see is a cluster of grapes. In other words, the size of the grapes and the size of the clusters were exponentially greater. And then he brings another story. It happened that a person had a row of fig trees, and he came to them and found there was a fence of honey around them. There was so much honey that the whole perimeter of the tree was like piling up around the tree. And you know what? Even today, hi Rhonda, I hear you're thinking it's hard to talk about spring when you have these snowstorms. I heard God should keep you all warm and cozy and open with a book and a prayer on your lips, and to enjoy the time inside, because that's all we got in that type of winter. We had 3 solid days of a storm out here, and we started where the house was starting to act like a sponge. Anyways, Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta said it happened that Rabbi Yehuda sent his son to Sichlan, and he said, bring dried figs from the barrel. He went up, and upon stretching his hand into the barrel, he found it was filled with honey. So the figs again had given over their juices. And he said, Father, it has honey in it. And Rabbi Yehuda said, no, immerse your hand, stick your hand further, and you'll find the dried figs. That even dried figs were filled with the juice of that fruit. Now, Rav Chisda is going to end this piece. And Rav Chisda said, I have given you a precious land, a deer-like inheritance, like the tzvi, right? Like you, Tzvi Cohen, right? The tzvi is a deer-like inheritance. What does that mean, that phrase? Well, he brings it from Yirmiyahu, the prophet. He says, why is the land of Israel compared to a deer? To teach you, just as a deer does not have enough skin to contain his flesh, likewise, the land of Israel is unable to contain all its fruit. Now, I never saw a deer that was like busting out of his skin. But I think the idea here is that when you have a land of valleys and hills, if you actually mention the length of a journey up and down hills, it's going to be much longer than the length of a journey that's measured as the bird flies. Assuming that your birds are not going up and down and all around and it got too much of the wrong wine. So you see there that the land of Israel is compared to a deer, because the skin, like when after a deer skin is produced for tanning, etc., and to create things, it's stretched out and it becomes bigger than it was when it first was on the body of the deer. So again, there's this idea of the expansion of the land. And then he goes on to tell us that Yerushalayim is is destined to be like the land of Israel, and the land of Israel will be like the entire world. Now, this is from Pesikta Rabbati, which is a midrash of various teachings. And this is a statement that's very, very potentially controversial. It says that in the end, Jerusalem will be like the land of Israel. What does that mean? It's got all one city limit? No, it means that there's going to be an exponential growth of holiness. And the holiness that we find in Jerusalem is going to spread to the entire country. And then the entire country, the holiness of Israel, will spread to the entire land. And that's the fulfillment of the verse. De'ad kol olam will know the presence of God like the sea covers the oceans, like the water covers the oceans. Okay, that there's going to be this expansion of the knowledge of God, and in such a way worldwide that the holiness will spread. And that's really the redemptive vision. It's not about Jewish superiority. It's about everybody receiving from the one God. And each person will receive according to their vessels. And so, but of course, the Midrash says, well, is it possible that God can expand the land of Israel? And Rabbi Yitzchak said, no one knows the length and breadth of a Torah scroll. When you look at a Torah, it's closed up. You don't know how big it is and how wide it is. And its real dimensions only become known when it is opened. And likewise, the land of Israel looks small. It's not even as big as New Jersey. But when you open up the land, the valleys and the hills, right, then it becomes much larger. And in the future, every valley shall be lifted up and every mountain shall be made low. In other words, there's going to be a lot of cultivation of these hills and be turned into fruitful, beneficial land that before was not useful at all, like the deserts, etc., and the hot houses that grow, pop up everywhere. And this is all part, at that time, its true dimensions will become known. The true value, right, of the land of Israel will be known. And, it's just an interesting thing. I've lived on the land here for 21 years. And I noticed that of all the trees that we planted, some did very well, some didn't do so well. But the ones that did well, it was interesting. They were placed in certain places where the water was always flowing by, and the trees that didn't do well, of course, they were not as close to the water. So what's the miracle in that, right? There's no miracle in that. But I noticed also that the trees that were too close together were in danger of violating each other's space. That also caused a problem. But I think that, that as we've grown in technology, and we know that when you play proper music, when you sing, when you say Tehillim, that you evoke holiness around you. And the trees and your plants and your fruits will absorb it. And anybody who's lived that way knows what I'm talking about. And you see that the blessing comes in ways you cannot imagine. But it's always the supernatural appearing through the natural. That we don't have to look for miracles that are beyond nature. We just need to look for the miraculous process of nature being turned up. And that's basically what's going to be happening now in the land as more and more Jews come back and more Jews are dedicating their lives to holiness. You're going to see more and more of this. And until you see the Jewish nation is one of the chief exporters of vegetables and fruits, the number one exporter of fruits, I think, in Europe. And there's many of these types of prophecies that have come true. If you know the economic breakdown of Eretz Israel and what it gives to the world, it's quite phenomenal compared to the size of the industry here and the number of people. And it says that the land of Israel will be filled with corn, with wine, and oil, and all the lands will fill her with silver and gold. So the other lands will, I guess they're going to have to come and buy, kind of like Joseph did in Egypt. There's going to be a time where the abundance here, and maybe the abundance will be not just fruit and vegetables, but because we know that there's a metaphoric quality to all these midrashim, and that the rabbis spoke in metaphors because Well, they didn't have language like computers and chips and cyber systems and all the other language that Israeli business is prospering at today. But it's still all part of the connection of the Jewish people to the land because we are part of it and it is part of us. And if we can just see through the physicality, you'll see how it's really true. And I bless all of you to come to the land for a week, for a month, for the rest of your life, whatever it might be, that to experience that, you can still carry that home wherever you are as well. And that relationship is a holy relationship. And God is the glue. God is the one that makes it all stick together. So we should all be blessed on this Tu B'Shvat to reconnect to the land, reconnect to the fruit, reconnect to our soul and the soul of things around us because they're alive. And we're alive. And it's not separate life. Life is one. It's just, some people look more like an apple and some people look like a grape. So we should all be blessed to find our connection to that land and to that fruit and to that blessing. And well, when it happens to you, then you'll know that the rabbis weren't just making up stories. And so we'll see you on all the other outlets soon. We're going to be doing class from Rabbi Nachman later, and then furthermore every day on Patreon. So it's a blessing to be here, and to all of you, Tu B'Shvat Sameach.